Large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, suburban sheriffs were in the news this week. In Jefferson Parish, there is a newly elected sheriff. And in St. Tammany Parish, a federal grand jury is investigating a former sheriff's work release program. Also in St. Tammany, a former sheriff's deputy was recently caught fabricating a DWI report. We'll look at these stories as well as the latest from the legislature, more election results, and our Future Watch segment examines the upper end of the Canal Street Business District. Doing business with us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Katie Moore, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. We go over to Errol first, and the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's contest has been resolved, at least for 2 years.
At least now until because this was an election to fill an interim position, and then the actual election will come in at the same time as the governor's election. For all the time spent on this campaign, for all the months of campaigning and all the money spent and all the TV spots, the pivotal moment in the campaign may have taken like 30 seconds, and that was during the Channel 6 debate when the candidates were asked to make yes or no questions, and one of the questions was, would they support Parish President Mike Guinea for re-election? And to everybody's surprise, I think John Fortunato said yes, he would, and spoke highly of him. Well, politically, that wasn't the right answer because, of course, Guinea's been involved in the sexting scandal. There's been an effort to get him to ousted from office. It doesn't have, the polls show his popularity really low, and that really hurt. Had that not happened, it could be that LaPinto might have won anyway. But it would have been a close vote, very close. The parish is, the parish has a strong population base on both the East Bank and the West Bank, but the East Bank is 55% to the East Bank's 45%, or the West Bank is 45 to the East Bank's 55%. So LaPinto had a little bit of advantage there, but it was still, the polls were showing a very close election. At one point, they were showing Fortunato leading. After that incident, though, as the UNO survey showed, as they said, there was a seismic shift among some voters, especially those voters at the age where they would have kids, who were involved with this. And so that, I think, became the decisive issue. The Fortunato people tried to bail out of it. They tried to make a statement saying...
he reversed himself completely after that.
Yeah, and they tried to say, if he did anything wrong, I would arrest him. But, I think he's been a good parish president, but it was really too late. And at that point, the election was really in trouble.
And that also coincided with when LaPinto was spending a lot of money. He had a lot of institutional support, and that was, kind of the heart of the campaign. So it could be that Fortunato started off with more name recognition because he'd been the spokesman for so long for the department. And, maybe that kind of big lead he had at the beginning was always bound to shrink a lot.
But I think a really political message came out of it is that in 2 years, when you have the next sheriff's election, will also be the rest of the parish-wide elections, including parish president.
And LaPinto only got 52%. Remember, Newell Normand always got like high 80s, low 90s. Right. There was never a contest, and there wasn't a contest against Harry Lee for many years. So if 52% is not a huge show of strength, he could attract...
With a much larger turnout the next time, you would think.
Yeah.
But also, Fortunato also claimed a little bit of the Lee heritage also, having been the speaker. They both claimed Harry Lee in this race, and Fortunato had a TV spot. I thought it was a very good TV spot that showed him as a younger deputy and at a rally with Harry Lee. But I think the political point is looking into the future in 2 years. This does not bode well for Mike Guinea, right?
It doesn't,
and my own feeling is, if you look at if he looks at the polls, I kind of think by then he won't even run. I think his family's going to say,
that's the big
you don't want this, you don't need this, and it probably bodes well for Cynthia Lee.
I was going to say, Harry Lee, speaking of Harry Lee, his daughter Cynthia Lee Shang is an at-large councilwoman, and she's expected to be in the mix for a higher office in 2 years too. It's going to be interesting in 2019.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It definitely will. So in terms of this race, though, Lupinto carried the East Bank. Fortunato, though, carried the West Bank. Is that correct?
He did, yeah. But Lupinto carried areas that Fortunato had been stronger in, like in the Kenner area.
Kenner, yeah.
And so Fortunato lost some areas that he was leading in those last few weeks.
So this race maybe will sort of foretell how the politics will shake out in another 2 years,
think so.
but it get some people thinking about maybe or maybe not.
A lot of people are going to be studying these numbers.
I think one thing, we've seen this in several campaigns where you have an incumbent who resigns, and then he has a favored candidate that he endorses and supports, that voters as a rule don't like that.
Yeah.
And I think there were some people who voted against Lupinto, not because they didn't like him,
Because of the way he
but they don't like that kind of politics.
Right, and of course Newell Norman escaped that when he became sheriff because Harry Lee had just died, so it really wasn't the same dynamic.
Right. I heard a lot of people calling this a coronation instead of an election.
Johnny Fortunato did that.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. A lot of people certainly
Yeah.
did resent that. So are we starting to see some changes, do you think, in Jefferson Parish politics?
I think so. I think, one thing that's interesting is, we used to have these giant figures, Harry Lee and, John Mamalidis back in the day, and, really Lawrence Hardy, just larger than life people who really mixed it up in other people's politics and would have these epic fights. And I don't really know who, Newell Norman was very powerful, but is Lupinto going to fill those shoes? I don't know. He's a different type, and we don't have the assessor and the DA are kind of quieter than their predecessors. Mike Yenny's very damaged, very ambitious, but very damaged. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see kind of who emerges as the next generation of power broker.
Well, I don't think you have identifiable factions like you used to have with the old Donnelly, Kronvich, and Muller and that kind of thing. I don't think you have that. But in any place where you have politics, you have some people who are strong behind the scenes, and they're the deal breakers. But look, we've come a long way away from the day when Lawrence Shahardy, the elder, was running for re-election as assessor. That day, right before qualifying closed, his son came in, signed in, and then the elder dropped out, and his son was elected. And people didn't mind. And the reason was because it was the assessor's job. And the assessor's job is the one job that people think differently about because that's the person who assesses their property tax. But we've went a long way from that.
Indeed, and also we now have to move over to another parish's politics, and that's over in St. Tammany. Katie, you started on this almost 4 years ago, looking into a work release program in St. Tammany Parish that the then Sheriff Jack Strain had privatized.
Right.
Now there is a federal investigation into this.
There is. We've been hearing rumors about it for, I can't even tell you how many times that we've heard rumors that the feds were looking into it, that they were getting close, that they were going to start issuing subpoenas, that they, had already requested documents, and now we got confirmation of that this week when we found out that this subpoena had actually been executed at the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office for just a slew of documents and records related to work release, related to some of those high-powered families within the Jack Strain Sheriff's Office. So he had a few families where there were a large number of people who worked for him, and they were well connected, and some of them and their children ended up getting these privatized work release programs to run. So my cohort over The Advocate, Sarah Paconis, and I have been covering this for years now, literally years, and Jack Strain shut down one of the work release facilities back when we were doing a bunch of stories that exposed deaths and unsafe conditions and lax supervision and things like that. But this other one remained open until Randy Smith became the sheriff. So now we're going to see what happens with that, federal investigation.
So there were some questions also about the construction of was there a new facility constructed in Slidell?
Yeah.
As well as who got the contract to run the facility?
Right. So the last story that Sarah and I did about this was about that facility, that St. Tammany Workforce Solutions building, because it was actually owned by the sheriff's office. And basically what Jack Strain did was he used tax money, public money, to fix up that building, and then handed that business over to people with very close ties to the sheriff's office. Two of the people who are listed as owners of that work release program are children of some of Strain's top deputies. So, I mean, imagine having a business, having somebody else pay to fix it up, and then handing it to you to run. I mean, I think anybody would want that deal, right? And so those are some of the questions and some of the documents
The question is, can anybody get that deal?
Can anybody get that deal?
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So, well, not most people anyway.
Sure. Yes.
Of course, Jack Strain is the former sheriff. Now.
sheriff.
So the current sheriff, is he cooperating, supplying all these documents, et cetera?
He is. And he issued a statement whenever this news first broke, basically saying that before I even took office, when I first got elected, because there was a big gap in time between when he got elected and when he actually took office, and he said that I had conversations with federal investigators then, and said I would cooperate fully and have turned over documents, but now we actually have a subpoena for them, which is an indication that this is not only moving forward, but that it's moving into the next phase, and that there is an active grand jury investigating it.
So this is the former administration. What does this current sheriff say about really asking the public to trust this office?
Well, that's difficult because he's taken a lot of heat, which we can talk about this a little bit later, but we've been doing a number of stories about him as well, and questions about how he's policing his police. And so, he's in a tough spot. And in that statement that he released about the Jack Strain subpoena, he said that, his top leadership has been cooperative with federal investigators, that, this has been sort of a partnership with them in getting, this whole situation cleaned up. So a big question mark, I think, is my answer.
So it's just the beginning, just the beginning of the investigation.
We should add quickly that, look at the criminal justice establishment in St. Tammany over the last few years. You've had the DA convicted, you've had the coroner convicted, now the former sheriff under investigation. That's something.
That definitely is. We're going to stick with you right now, Stephanie, and let's talk about what's going on with the legislature.
Yeah.
What's going on with the legislature?
Well, they get the weekend off, so I'm sure they're very happy to see their families because they've been in Baton Rouge a lot, not getting a lot done. Special session, which went right into the regular session. Of course, they can't really deal with the elephant in the room, the budget situation and the fiscal cliff in the regular session. There's still conversations about how to do that. But in the meantime, they're kind of moving through all the other issues they deal with. And this week, we saw some big issues maybe fall by the wayside, I think. One is, or two, that are kind of connected, are two really big parts of Governor John Bel Edwards' agenda. He ran on these issues. He's tried every year to raise the minimum wage only a little bit, only, up to $8.50 over 2 years, and to put some legislation in place that addresses the big pay gap between genders. And both of those efforts got out of committee in the Senate, and both of them died in the full Senate this week. And he, of course, is very disappointed and says he's going to keep trying, and has produced poll numbers that are from his own poll, but they're very high, that, people really do support these things.
So the minimum wage bill legislation was just to bring it up to just $8.50?
Just $8.50 over
$15
2 years, yeah. Nobody expects that.
Yeah,
this is, I think the more realistic play is, look, we're talking $50 a week for people who work 40 hours a week over 2 years. The minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, which is what Louisiana is based on, is $7.25, hasn't gone up in so long. Yeah. People's cost of living. The governor really connects this to, a lot of single parents who are trying to live on this, and it just, it's a conservative legislature. There's a lot of business interests that are very powerful, and it's just does not seem to be going anywhere.
What about TOPS?
TOPS also, again, there has been talk constantly about reining in the future cost of TOPS, because it kind of has, up until now, not anymore, but it has grown. Every time tuition grows up, the TOPS scholarship grows. That's been capped now at kind of last year's levels, but the idea is that the growth curve is so high that they really want to try to bring in future costs for future students, I should say, 8th graders, not high school students even. There was a task force that met that, kind of didn't come to agreement, so they forwarded a whole lot of recommendations to the legislature. That was a sign of trouble when even the task force couldn't make a recommendation. The chairman, a guy named Blade Parish, is also the Senate Education Chairman, and he had a bill that would have made TOPS scholarships a $4,000 stipend as opposed to, equivalent to tuition, and had kind of a separate fund for higher achieving students. So, and that's one of the arguments that maybe what we should focus on with TOPS is keeping the best and the brightest, steer more of the money to the higher performing students who might be recruited elsewhere. The counter argument, that's a pretty powerful one too, is, if you do that, there's no means testing. And if you do that, you might lose some lower income students who might not otherwise be able to go to college, a lot of minority students.
And it was meant to help those students.
And it was meant to help those students if you go back to the original intent. And, right now, instead of picking one or the other, the state has pretty much said, well, we're doing both. And that's kind of where we are. Anyway, so this bill did not make it out.
So are there other bills to
There are some
do
other
with
bills,
us?
but they're small. They're kind of changing, they're requiring tweaking more.
But certainly most important is the money to fund it.
And that's the other thing.
Yeah.
We don't know. You remember 2 years ago, TOPS was not fully funded, and all of a sudden students had to come up with the balance of their tuition. If you're looking at going to college next year, you don't know if your full top scholarship is going to be there, because probably the legislature won't pass a budget until June. And we don't know if there will be enough money. The governor certainly says he wants to. The legislators say they want to, and that there's money to be cut elsewhere. The governor says there isn't money to be cut elsewhere. And this is the time of year when people are making decisions for next fall, so it's a real problem.
So it's still pretty much an unknown at this point.
It's very much an unknown, short term and long term.
Okay. All right,
So-
Stephanie, thanks a lot. Let's
Sure.
go over to Don right now. Upper end of the business district of Canal Street. We had a
Perfect way to
discussion
say
about
it.
that.
Is it upper? Is
earlier.
it lower? We're talking about Canal Street, very close to the new hospital developments between Claiborne and Rampart, really. All of Canal Street, from the river to Claiborne, has really seen a massive revitalization over the last 5 years. A lot of that is spurred, the Downtown Development District says that really is because of the new hospitals. The hospitals coming in, developers and investors have been interested in that area. There are people there, there's life happening again. We saw the Jung Hotel reopen. There are really only 3 sites at that end of Canal Street that haven't seen that revitalization come to fruition yet. The first one is the former Canal Street Hotel. It's been operated as a Days Inn. It's been operated as a number of different hotels. It's right on the corner of Canal and Claiborne.
Originally, a long time ago, it was called the Governor House.
Okay.
And then it's gone through a whole bunch of names since then.
It was acquired in 2015 by a group now controlled by Joe Yeager and others. They are actively working on redevelopment plans now. It will likely be another hotel. It is, the DDD folks believe there will be a deal financed and in place. There is not a timeline yet, but it's not going to be an eyesore forever. It really, there will be something there, and the development downtown is spurring developers and finance people to be very, very interested in that one. The other one is Canal and Rampart, the old Woolworths, right across from the Sanger Hotel. For years, that has been, that maybe that's going there, maybe this hotel is going there. Now, it was announced 2 months ago now, that it would be a Hard Rock Hotel. Construction is underway. They almost lost the permit for construction on that site twice over the last year, just because work wasn't happening fast enough. It's properly permitted, work is happening. It's going to be a 350-room hotel with 62 condos and rooftop bar and that sort of restaurants, that's supposed to be complete in the spring of 2019. The third site on that part of Canal Street that doesn't see major development yet is the Lowe's State Palace Theater. There has been no conversation on that in many, many months. It's gone very, very quiet. No talks of what it will be, could be. It is really, it may be the one remaining eyesore, dead spot on really all of Canal Street from the river to Claiborne Avenue. The hospital certainly caused this development, but the Downtown Development District says now the city and the district really need to have a lot of work to do to kind of encourage job development and job training that frames around those hospitals. Research and development. We are seeing 1/3 of the cancer patients in Louisiana go out of the state for cancer treatment, and they say what brings people there is reputation. What gets the reputation is research and patient care. And if you can combine the research and the patient care and have the job force that can support that, then patients come here instead of going to MD Anderson or going to Birmingham. Right. So that will be really the next focus that helps build Canal Street completely and fills these condos that are coming in. But
we are seeing development.
We are seeing development happen.
Did you have
No, I was saying, the Lowe's was a nice the theater, and it was a big theater, but maybe there's just no need for it now. There's just so many theaters
Kurt
now.
Weigel told me today there may be no reason to have another theater in that area, but maybe there's something you can do with a building that's built out like it is, with the size it is, maybe big retail or entertainment venue of some other sort, to keep it, not try to chop it up, because it is well done and big theater. But
And then the other question in that area, of course, is Charity Hospital, which is right nearby,
on the
and
other-
big empty
right.
building, and maybe something will happen at some point and bring more people in.
right, there's a group studying that as we speak.
So we'll see what develops in the future.
It has to be the
back
most
in-
studied property
Yes.
in New Orleans.
One study after another. Stephanie, over to you.
Yes.
We did have some other elections
We
this
did.
past weekend.
We're always having elections.
We have a
and-
lot of elections, as you wrote about.
And we're
fairly
actually going to
recently.
have more, because in this election there were a few seats vacated, so now we're going to have elections to fill those at some point. We don't know when yet. Orleans Parish, we had 3 special elections. One was for the Court of Appeal, which is a big seat and a big important seat. There were 2 candidates: Dale Atkins, the very long time clerk of Civil District Court, a big political player for many years; Robin Pittman, who was a district court judge. Dale Atkins won quite handily, 58% of the vote. Probably not surprising. She's been a familiar face on the scene for
Whenever
for
there's been an
decades.
election, she's always a rumored candidate for whatever the office is.
Right. She did run
It's-
for DA once, but many other times she's been a rumored candidate. The kind of irony is she hasn't had to run elections in a long time because nobody would run against her. She was so powerful in that job. And it's a powerful job. One thing is it controls a lot of other jobs, and that makes it pretty desirable.
So that seat is now open. We have to kind of move through this one
Okay, the
quickly.
next one is Civil District Court A. There was a vacancy won by Ellen Hazor, who's another very familiar face. She was on the city council years ago, back when Mark Morial was mayor, and has been in this seat for 18 years. She had been, the clerk of the First City Court, which is, that's another pretty big office. That's the kind of smaller claims court connected to Civil District Court, and this is the one that covers the East Bank. So this is another big job that will go wanting and probably have a lot of candidates.
And another election for that.
And another election for that.
Okay.
The third one was a state rep district to replace Helena Moreno, who's of course about to join the city council. Very easily won by Royce Duplessis, who's an attorney, member of the Planning Commission, was really the one who had a lot of establishment support, and he's going to be sworn in April.
So other elections, when would those elections come up to fill those clerkships?
They
do
haven't
you
been
think?
called yet, so
Okay,
not
but they will
sure.
be-
But they will be, and we're
Like you said,
here we go again.
It should be really a slate of candidates because those are desirable seats.
They're very desirable seats, yes.
Okay. All right. Over to Katie right now. And as you mentioned before, the current sheriff
Yes.
right now is facing some criticism over what has happened with now a former deputy and a DWI charge.
Absolutely. So we started a series that we called Law and Disorder, and the first story out of that series was that there was this deputy named Ricky Steinert who was caught fabricating probable cause on a DWI arrest, and there was video that showed the person essentially passing the field sobriety test, but in the report that Steinert wrote on it, didn't match. Said the guy had his leg up, said he had his arms out, all these things that were clear on the video didn't happen. So the question that came out of that is, well, what happened with Ricky Steinert, and how, again, did the police themselves, and how did the current sheriff handle that? Well, what happened was the current sheriff, Randy Smith, said that Steinert came in the day that he was going to be questioned by Internal Affairs and resigned before he could fire him. Well, then we find out that Ricky Steinert went and got a job in Red River Parish for another sheriff as a deputy, even though, one of the things that can give you the most trouble in your career in law enforcement is lying, because defense attorneys can use that in all of the cases that they have that you make. So you're sort of nuclear at that point, And so he gets a job in Red River Parish, and then we find out that he very likely got a recommendation from somebody within the sheriff's office in St. Tammany to get that job. So then he has since been fired in Red River Parish, but there are a lot of questions as well, other stories that Sarah Pagonis at The Advocate and I have done, looking at how Randy Smith has been handling these cases that were internal investigations involving his sheriffs. So I think it's a very top of mind issue, especially when you have things like the Alton Sterling decision happening this week and that whole situation.
So this individual was charged with a DWI, and there was video shot by his friend because
Yes.
St. Tammany does not have body cams.
They do not. They're one of the few, agencies, even on the North Shore, that don't have them. Mandeville Police have them. Many other agencies have them, but St. Tammany does not.
So why then was the DWI report fabricated? What's the reason for it? Why would the deputy want to do that?
That's a
Do we
great
know?
question. I wish he would answer that question for me. I mean, I was able to get him on the phone one time, and he told me things like he left St. Tammany Parish because he wanted to get a higher paying job, which is also what he told Red River Parish when he was trying to get a job there. So I didn't get to have a really deep conversation with him about the facts of this case, but he was working on one of these grants that are provided by the Louisiana Highway Safety Commission to do DWI enforcement, to get drunk drivers off the streets, to check for seatbelt violations, to check for, those violations that have been deemed a priority on the federal level. And so he was working under one of those grants overtime to do this. They don't have a quota system to where they have to make a certain number of arrests, but they do have to make a certain number of contacts with people, meaning pulling people over that are suspected of DWI. And so, you wonder if that plays a role. We don't know the answer to that.
So is there further investigation now going on with this incident?
There is further investigation going on. After we did these reports, the sheriff initially had said, case closed. I've found that he did violate it. He, resigned, and that's it. No criminal investigation. Well, since we started doing these stories and raising the questions about whether or not this is filing a false public record, which is a Louisiana law, the sheriff has sent it to the Attorney General's office for review, so we don't know how they're going to handle it or if they're going to look at all of the cases that Ricky Steinert worked.
And the DWI charge, was that dropped?
It
against that
was. It was
individual?
dropped. Yeah.
Okay. All righty, Katie. Thanks a lot. All right. Time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, actually, kind of looking back one day, we just want to acknowledge yesterday, Thursday, the death of Rusty Staub, who's one of a handful of baseball players from New Orleans who made it to the big leagues and became a star. Mel Ott and Mel Pornell, with others, and Will Clark. But he made it. He started off at Jesuit High School, and if a 19-year-old, he went up to the major leagues. And Houston just got in a franchise. And he started off there and then had a career where he made a name for himself with the Mets and with Montreal. Ironically, yesterday was the opening day of baseball season, and the team that was the returning world champs is Houston. And so the team that they started off with was a day of celebration and I guess memory for him.
And by all accounts, he was just really a good guy. Very, very nice guy.
Yeah.
Steph.
Well, New Orleans has a new inspector general, a man named Derry Harper, and the new inspector general has met with a new mayor, LaToya Cantrell, apparently, and they've agreed that, time to really look at the sewage and water board. So,
Thank goodness.
expect that.
All right.
All right. We've talked a lot about the LSU women's gymnastics team. A week from tomorrow at 3 o'clock in Raleigh, North Carolina, they are the #2 overall seed as they entered regional competition for the NCAA regional tournament. It is their 34th straight appearance in regional tournaments.
Great for them, and best of luck to them. Katie.
Just springboarding off of Stephanie and the Sewage and Water Board, one of the things that we keep hearing about on our Down the Drain Facebook page that we created, it's a group where people can talk about issues that they've had with drainage. People have had a crazy number of billing problems, and so much more to come on that. I'll just say that.
We'll be looking for that. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for watching us. Have a wonderful Easter weekend. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Bowen, McLeod, and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.